Don't breathe. If they hear you, you'll die. Vincent Corsetti froze as a small hand yanked him into the shadows behind the heavy velvet curtains. The scent of cheap laundry soap and raw terror filled his lungs. The hand belonged to Lily, his maid, a ghost of a woman he had never truly seen in 4 years, her amber eyes wide with fear, pressing a trembling finger to her lips as footsteps echoed just beyond the fabric. Through a narrow gap in the curtains, Vincent watched his empire crumble. His fiancée, Camille, laughed softly with his younger brother, Marco, their bodies too close, their voices dripping with intimacy, and something far more dangerous. Marco muttered that Vincent was proving harder to kill than expected, and Camille replied with a sigh that she had already doubled the dose in his evening whiskey. In that instant, every dizzy spell, every wave of nausea, every moment of weakness Vincent had blamed on exhaustion, snapped into horrifying focus. It wasn't stress. It wasn't age. It was poison served with a kiss by the woman who wore his ring. Lily didn't wait for him to process the betrayal. She dragged him through the servants' corridors and out into the rain-soaked night, refusing his demand to call Captain Reed. "Your captain," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "He's bought. Marco owns him now. Calling him means telling them exactly where you are." She stripped Vincent of anything traceable, his phone, his Rolex, even the signet ring bearing his family crest, and dropped them into a drainage gutter like they were worthless. Hidden in a cramped room behind an old church in the poorest corner of Chicago, Vincent burned with fever while a priest asked no questions and a maid who had nothing fought to keep him alive. And when the conspirators finally cornered them at the charity gala, Vincent stepped forward, not as a mafia boss, but as a man reborn, ready to expose the truth and protect the only person who had seen him as worth saving. If this satisfies you, let's share with others. One satisfies you means the world to me. Subscribe so you won't miss another story like this, because sometimes the one who saves you is the one you never even noticed. Now let's continue today's story. Vincent Corsetti had never known his legs could feel so weak. Every step was a battle, every breath a sharp pain tearing across his chest. The poison had seeped deeper than he had realized, and now as the adrenaline began to fade, his body was paying the price. Lily supported him with her slender shoulders, her arm wrapped around his waist as if she were used to carrying burdens heavier than herself. They moved through the servant corridors, narrow and shadowed passages Vincent had never known existed inside his own house. Lily knew every corner, every stair, every door that creaked, and every door that could be opened and closed in silence. She guided him like a ghost through a maze, and Vincent realized with bitter clarity that this maid understood his mansion better than he ever had. They had just turned past a secondary staircase, when heavy footsteps echoed ahead. Lily shoved Vincent into a dark alcove just as a flashlight beam swept past. Vincent held his breath, his back pressed against the cold wall, his heart pounding as if it might burst. Through a narrow crack, he saw one of his own guards on patrol, his expression indifferent, unaware that his employer was hiding only a few steps away. Or perhaps he did know. Perhaps he too had been bought by Marco. Vincent no longer knew whom to trust. When the guard disappeared, Lily pulled him forward again, faster now, more urgent. They reached the back door of the auxiliary kitchen, where leftover food was taken out, and trash was removed every night. Rain still poured as if the sky itself were crying. Vincent glanced toward the garage, where his supercars rested in silence. "Take me to the garage," he ordered, his voice weak but still carrying the habit of command. Lily shook her head, her gaze so firm it stopped him short. "Your cars have GPS," she said, her voice no longer that of a servant. "The police can track them. Marco can track them. Do you want to escape, or do you want to hand them a map?" Vincent wanted to argue, wanted to assert that he was Vincent Corsetti, that he did not take buses, that he did not flee like a criminal through the rain. But dizziness crashed over him, so strong he nearly collapsed, and Lily caught him in time. They walked through the rain, two unsteady shadows crossing dark alleys and nameless street corners. Vincent trembled, his soaked shirt clinging to his skin, the cold cutting into his bones. But Lily did not stop. She led him to a deserted night bus stop, where a dim yellow light fell over an old waiting bench. They sat there, waiting, and for the first time Vincent truly looked at the woman beside him. She was smaller than he had thought, thinner than he remembered. Chestnut hair clung to her pale face, amber eyes fixed forward with the wary focus of an animal long accustomed to being hunted. 4 years. She had worked in his house for 4 years, and this was the first time he had truly seen her. The bus arrived, nearly empty, carrying only a few exhausted figures lost in sleep. Lily helped Vincent aboard, settling him into the back seat where darkness shielded them from curious eyes. He wanted to ask where they were going, but exhaustion was overwhelming, and the poison in his blood was pulling him down into a deep and murky haze. When Vincent opened his eyes again, they were standing before an old church. The brick walls were cracked, the stained glass windows faded, the bell tower leaning as if burdened by too many years. Lily knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. The door opened, and an elderly man appeared, his hair pure white, his eyes gentle yet unfathomably deep. "Father Thomas," Lily said, her voice trembling for the first time since they had left the mansion. "I need help." The priest asked no questions. He looked at Vincent, looked at Lily, then nodded and stepped aside. He led them through the darkened nave, through a small door behind the altar, into a cramped room containing only an old bed, a wooden chair, and a crucifix on the wall. "God does not ask about the past of those who seek refuge," Father Thomas said, his voice low and warm. "Stay here." Vincent collapsed onto the worn bed, his body heavy as lead. The room spun before his eyes, and he felt fever rising from deep within his bones. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was Lily's amber gaze, resting on him with something he could not yet name. The first night at the church was the night Lily thought Vincent Corsetti would die. The fever came like a storm, violent and merciless. Only a few hours after he collapsed onto the old bed, his body began to shake uncontrollably, sweat pouring out like a flood, soaking the thin sheets beneath him. Lily sat beside him, using an old cloth dipped in cold water to wipe his forehead, his neck, every drop of sweat sliding down as if his body were trying to force the poison out by any means it could. She did not sleep. She did not dare to sleep. Each time Vincent's breathing grew more frantic. Each time his body jerked within a dream, her heart tightened with the fear that this might be the last time. Father Thomas brought fever medicine and a bowl of thin porridge, but Vincent could not swallow anything. He drifted in and out of delirium, murmuring words Lily did not understand, then suddenly understood all too well. "Mother," Vincent whispered, his voice as fragile as a child's. "Mom, I am sorry." Lily froze, the damp cloth resting on his forehead. She knew about Vincent's mother. The entire mansion knew, though no one ever dared speak of it. She had died giving birth to Marco, taking part of the Corsetti family's soul into the grave with her. Vincent had been 8 years old when he lost his mother, and from that moment he became the one who cared for his newborn brother in her place. He had loved Marco as his own blood, as a final promise to the dead, and now that very brother wanted him dead. "Father," Vincent called again, his voice breaking in the darkness. "I will protect the family. I promise. I promise you." Lily looked at his face, twisted in pain, and she saw what she had never seen in the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. She saw a child orphaned by his mother at 8 years old. She saw a 26-year-old man watching his father be assassinated before his eyes. She saw a man who had carried an entire empire on his shoulders, from an age too young to understand what unconditional love was. Vincent Corsetti, the devil of legend, the man the entire city feared, was crying in his sleep and calling for his mother like a lost child. On the second night, the fever peaked. Vincent burned like fire, his entire body consumed from within. He began to convulse violently, teeth clenched, veins rising on his forehead like taut ropes. Lily panicked and called Father Thomas, and the elderly priest rushed in with a bottle of herbal spirits and whispered prayers. They pressed cold cloths against his body, forced him to sip tiny amounts of water, and begged God to allow this man to live one more night. "Why?" Vincent whispered through the haze, tears leaking from the corners of his tightly shut eyes. "Marco, why? I gave you everything. I loved you more than myself. Why do you want to kill me?" Lily felt her chest constrict. She had hated the Corsetti family. She had hated the luxurious mansion where she had been worked like a slave. She had hated Vincent because he represented everything that had stolen her life away. But now, watching him lying there, weak and shattered, she no longer saw a mafia boss. She saw only a lonely human being betrayed by the very people he loved most. Just like her. Just like the day her own uncle sold her without her knowing. Just like the day she learned that blood did not mean love, and that family could be the cruelest thing of all. Lily took Vincent's hand, his large rough palm, now weak within hers. She did not know why she did it. Perhaps because she understood the feeling of abandonment. Perhaps because she did not want anyone to die alone in the dark. Or perhaps, deep down, she was saving herself by saving him. She stayed there all night, never letting go, never closing her eyes. Father Thomas knelt beside the bed, rosary slipping through his fingers, his lips moving with whispered prayers. The small room was filled with silence, broken only by Vincent's labored breathing and the sound of rain still falling outside the window. Lily did not pray. She had forgotten how long ago, but she held his hand tightly and whispered, not knowing whether it was to him or to herself, "Do not die. Do you hear me? Do not die. You are not allowed to die when I have risked everything to save you." The night stretched endlessly. There were moments when Lily thought Vincent had stopped breathing, and her heart plunged into an abyss. Then his chest would rise again, faint but determined, as if somewhere deep inside he was still fighting to live. When the first light of the third morning slipped through the narrow window, Lily realized the hand in hers was no longer burning hot. Vincent's forehead had cooled. His breathing was steadier, slower, calmer. The fever was breaking. Lily looked at his face, pale and hollow after days of hell, and for the first time she allowed herself to cry, not from sorrow, but from relief, because for reasons she did not yet understand, this man being alive mattered to her far more than she had ever expected. Vincent opened his eyes and didn't know where he was. The ceiling was low, stained with patches of damp mold, utterly foreign compared to the finely carved plaster ceilings of his mansion. Weak light slipped through a small window, falling across the wooden crucifix hanging on the opposite wall. He blinked, trying to piece together the fragments of memory shattering inside his head, and then everything crashed back like a tidal wave. Camille, Marco, a glass of whiskey, poison, betrayal, a small hand dragging him into darkness, running through the rain, and amber eyes watching him before he slipped into blackness. Vincent tried to sit up, but his body felt like stone, every muscle aching as if he'd been beaten for days. He turned his head to the side and froze. Lily was sitting on the wooden chair beside the bed, her head resting against the mattress, brown hair spilling forward to hide her pale face, and her hand was still holding his. Vincent looked down at their intertwined fingers, her small, calloused hand inside his larger one, and a strange feeling rose in his chest. How long had she been here? He studied her face, the deep bruised shadows beneath her eyes, skin drained from lack of sleep, lips dry and cracked. She looked like she hadn't slept for days, because of him, a stranger to her, an employer who hadn't even remembered her name before that fateful night. Vincent shifted slightly, and Lily startled awake. Her amber eyes flew open, first in alarm, then relief, then something soft he wasn't used to seeing directed at him. Vincent didn't answer right away. He looked at her, truly looked, as if his gray eyes were searching for the soul behind her amber gaze, seeing her as a person for the first time. Then he asked, his throat dry as sand. "Why?" Lily blinked. "Why what? Why did you save me?" Vincent asked, each word heavy as stone. "You didn't owe me anything. You had no reason to save me. I'm Mafia. I'm the man you should have hated, so why?" Lily was silent for a long moment. She slowly pulled her hand from his, as if only then realizing how tightly she'd been holding on. Then she said, her voice gentle but unyielding, "Because no one deserves to die at the hands of someone they trust, no matter who they are." The answer was simple to the point of cruelty, and it cut straight through Vincent like a blade. He closed his eyes, and images poured in. Camille handing him a glass of whiskey every night, that sweet smile on her lips. "Drink it, darling. I made it just for you." Marco sitting beside him in meetings, always asking about long-term plans, about wills, about who would inherit if something happened to him. He'd thought his brother was learning. He'd never thought his brother was planning. The dizziness he'd blamed on work, the sleepless nights he'd blamed on stress, the nausea he'd dismissed as bad eating habits. All of it, every smallest sign had been there all along, and he'd been blind enough to see nothing but his own naive trust. Vincent slammed his hand down on the bed, hard enough to make Lily flinch. Pain ripped through his arm, but he didn't care. Rage boiled through his veins, hotter than any fever. "I'll kill him," he roared, his voice like thunder. "I'll go back and tear Marco apart with my own hands. I'll make him beg for death before I let him stop breathing. And Camille, you're not strong enough to kill anyone right now." Lily cut in, calm and cold. Vincent stiffened, staring at her in disbelief. No one interrupted him. No one spoke to him like that. No one had dared in 10 years. Yet this small, thin maid was meeting his gaze without a trace of fear. "You can't even stand on your own," Lily continued, her voice unwavering. "You want to kill Marco. Fine. But what do you think you can do when you can't even walk from the bed to the door without falling? Do you want revenge, or do you want suicide?" Vincent opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. Because she was right. He hated it, bitterly, but she was right. He looked at her for a long time, with gray eyes long trained to read people. She didn't lower her gaze or look away, only met his stare with the strange calm of someone who'd faced things far worse than the fury of a mafia boss. And in that moment, Vincent realized she wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just an invisible shadow in his mansion. There was a story behind those amber eyes, a story dark enough to make her fear nothing. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice softer now, no longer a command but almost a plea. "Who are you, Lily Monroe?" Lily stayed silent for a long time. Vincent's question hung in the air like a noose, and she felt it tightening around her throat. No one had asked her that in many years. No one had cared who she was, where she came from, or what she had survived. She had only been the hands that cleaned, the shadow that moved in silence. Maid number 7 on the employee list of the Corsetti mansion. But Vincent's gray eyes were on her now, truly seeing her, and for the first time in 4 years, she felt that she existed. She drew a deep breath and began to speak. "I was born in the outskirts of Detroit," Lily said, her voice like water flowing over sharp stones. "My father was a mechanic. My mother worked at a laundromat on the corner. We were poor, but I didn't know that. To me, that small apartment was the whole world. My mother used to sing while she cooked. My father used to toss me into the air and catch me, laughing so loudly the neighbors complained. I was happy. At least, I thought I was." She paused, amber eyes clouding as if she were looking into a distant past. Vincent didn't interrupt, only listened, and his silence settled around her like a blanket that let her go on. "My father was a gambling addict," Lily continued, her voice hardening. "I didn't know until it was too late. He owed money to the mafia. A lot of money. The kind of debt that can never be paid off because the interest is more than a mechanic could earn in an entire lifetime. When I was 12, my father died in a car accident. His car hit a tree on an empty road at 3 a.m. The police said he was drunk. But my father didn't drink. Not ever." Vincent saw her jaw tighten, and he understood. He understood all too well which deaths are staged as accidents, and which ones carry the hand of darkness behind them. It was the language of the world he lived in. "My mother collapsed," Lily went on. She couldn't take it. Her heart was already weak, and losing her husband was the last straw. 6 months later, she died in a hospital bed, her hand still clutching their wedding photo. I was 12, orphaned of both parents, and completely alone in the world. She gave a short, hollow laugh without any joy, or so I thought. It turned out I had an uncle. He showed up at my mother's funeral, patted my head, said he'd take care of me. I believed him. I thought blood meant love. I was wrong. Lily's hand clenched the fabric of her clothes, her knuckles turning white. Vincent noticed the slight tremor in her, barely there, but he saw it. "When I was 16, Lily said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "my uncle sold me to a human trafficking ring to pay off his own gambling debts. They came in the middle of the night, pulled a bag over my head, and when I opened my eyes again, I was in a windowless basement with 13 other girls. Some were younger than me." Vincent said nothing, but his jaw tightened until the tendons stood out sharply. 4 years, Lily said, the words falling between them like a heavy stone. 4 years in hell. I won't go into details. You don't need to know. You don't want to know. Just understand that there are things worse than death, and I lived through all of them. She lifted her gaze to the crucifix on the wall, her eyes distant. Father Thomas found me during a police raid. He wasn't an official rescuer, just an old priest who happened to be there when they brought us out. He saw me, a 20-year-old girl who looked 40, and he said something I'll never forget. "Do you want to be free?" Lily looked back at Vincent, her eyes dry, without a single tear. He took me to a shelter, helped me get new papers, gave me a new name. Lily Monroe isn't my real name. The girl who had that name died in that basement. I'm just what's left. But my father's debt, Lily said with a bitter smile, didn't die with him. It was sold again and again, and in the end, it belonged to the Corsetti family. I was given a choice, work in the mansion to pay it off, or go back to the streets. I chose the mansion. At least there, no one touched me. She looked at Vincent, her eyes like embers smoldering low. For 4 years I worked in your house, scrubbing floors, doing laundry, cleaning. I learned how to become invisible, because invisible means safe. No one saw me. No one remembered my name, and I liked it that way. Until the night I heard them talking about killing you. Vincent swallowed hard. He'd heard countless stories of suffering, had witnessed endless tragedies in the underworld he ruled, but hearing her speak like this, calm and steady, without tears, without begging for pity, only the raw truth exposed like an old scar, made his chest tighten. "Your uncle's name," Vincent said. his voice cold as ice. "What's his name?" Lily blinked, confused by the question. "What? His name," Vincent repeated, each word like a bullet. "The man who sold you. I'll find him." Lily looked into those gray eyes and shivered. Not from fear, but because for the first time in her life, someone was angry on her behalf. For the first time, her pain mattered to someone other than herself. Outside the four walls of the small church, the world was in chaos. Lily did not know this until Father Thomas brought an old radio into the room, the kind with a rusted silver antenna and static that hissed like weeping ghosts. He set it on the small wooden table by the window, turned the dial, and a broadcaster's voice flooded the room like poisoned water. "Breaking news. Mafia boss Vincent Corsetti is believed to have been kidnapped from his private mansion 5 days ago. His younger brother, Marco Corsetti, held an emergency press conference this morning and announced a reward of $1 million for any information leading to the recovery of his brother." Vincent sat bolt upright, gray eyes freezing as Marco's voice crackled through the distorted speaker. "My brother is everything I have." Marco's voice trembled with grief, flawless in every note like a performance carefully rehearsed. "I don't know who did this, but I beg them. Please let him go. He isn't just the head of the Corsetti family. He's my family, the man who raised me after our mother died. I'll do anything, pay any price, as long as he comes home alive." Lily saw Vincent's hand clamp around the edge of the bed, his knuckles turning bone white. His jaw clenched so tightly she could hear his teeth grind. He said nothing, but his silence was more terrifying than any outburst of rage. The broadcaster continued. "Mr. Corsetti's fiancée, Camille Ashford, also appeared at the press conference in a state of emotional collapse. Then Camille's voice came through, clear and shaking, soaked in tears and desperation. "Vincent, if you can hear this, I love you. I'm waiting for you. Please come home to me. Please come home." Her sobbing spilled through the radio waves, and Lily felt sick to her stomach. She had seen Camille smile at Marco in the shadows, had heard her speak about increasing the poison dosage with the same calm tone one used to discuss the weather, and now she was crying before millions, as if her heart were breaking. The world was insane. Murderers mourned their victims in front of cameras, and everyone believed them. "The FBI has joined the investigation," the broadcaster announced. "Chicago police are coordinating with the Corsetti family in the search for Vincent Corsetti. Captain Daniel Reed stated that this is the department's top priority, and they won't rest until the perpetrator is found." Vincent laughed, a cold and bitter sound echoing through the small room. "Reed," he spat the name as if it reeked. "That bloodhound is hunting me for Marco. He doesn't want to save me. He wants to finish what the poison couldn't." Lily stood by the window, staring out at the empty alley behind the church. $1 million. That amount was enough to change anyone's life in this neighborhood. Enough to make people forget morality, forget conscience, forget that a human life could be worth more than money. She spoke without turning around. "They won't stop searching. $1 million. The whole city will become Marco's eyes and ears. Every homeless person, every taxi driver, every street vendor, anyone who sees you, could be the one who makes the call." Vincent didn't answer. He sat there, gray eyes locked on the radio as if he could burn it with hatred alone. Lily understood what he was thinking. Marco didn't just want him dead. He wanted to control the story. He wanted to be the grieving brother, the reluctant leader forced to carry the family when his brother was taken. When Vincent died, Marco would be the hero. No one suspects the man who cried on national television. "He's been planning this for a long time," Vincent finally said, his voice low and thick like tar. "Not weeks, not months. He's calculated this for years. Every smile, every hug, every time he called me brother. It was all an act." Lily turned to look at him, and she saw something in those gray eyes that wasn't just anger. It was pain. The pain of a man betrayed by his own blood. She stepped closer to the bed, slowly, and placed her hand on his shoulder. She didn't speak. There were no words that could carry this moment, but she was there, beside him, and sometimes presence is worth more than 1,000 comforts. Vincent didn't push her away. For the first time, he allowed someone to touch him while he was weak. For the first time, human contact didn't feel like a threat. The door opened and Father Thomas stepped inside, his aged face tight with worry. "My child," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Someone is asking about the room behind the church." Mrs. Martha, the neighbor. She saw the light through the window last night. Mrs. Martha was a 60-year-old woman with eyes sharp as razors and a memory better than any notebook. She had lived in the small house right next to the church since her husband died 15 years ago, and since then she had turned watching her neighbors into a full-time occupation. Nothing happened in this neighborhood without her knowing. No unfamiliar car parked too long. No new face appeared. No unusual light escaped her notice. And last night, she had seen light coming from the room behind the church. The room Father Thomas always said was used to store old belongings. Lily felt the blood in her veins turn cold when she heard Father Thomas speak. She looked at Vincent, and he understood immediately. Without a word, he lay back down, pulled the blanket over his face, and became a nameless shape on the old bed. Father Thomas went out to greet Mrs. Martha, and Lily heard her voice drift in, sweet but laced with suspicion. "Father, I made chicken soup, the kind you like. And Father, is there someone staying in the room behind the church? I saw a light last night. Are you sheltering someone?" Father Thomas's voice was low and calm as always. "You are very kind, Mrs. Martha. It is a patient, a poor man with mental illness. No family left. I asked a nurse to come care for him. His condition is very severe. He cannot receive visitors." Lily understood that it was her cue. She opened the door and stepped out, her face drawn with exhaustion, her clothes wrinkled from a sleepless night. Mrs. Martha looked her up and down, eyes sweeping over her like a metal detector. "Are you the nurse?" she asked, her voice heavy with doubt. "You look very young." "Yes, ma'am. I work with a charity shelter," Lily replied, her voice gentle and modest. "Father Thomas asked me to care for the patient. He is very ill, he screams often, and does not recognize anyone." Mrs. Martha did not answer at once, her gaze fixed on the half-open door, trying to peer inside. Lily's heart pounded like a war drum as the woman stepped closer, closer still. Just a moment more, and she would see Vincent. $1 million. That money was lying on the bed less than 3 steps away from Mrs. Martha. Lily moved quickly to the side, blocking the doorway, her face holding a soft smile even as her palms were slick with sweat. "Ma'am, it would not be good for you to go in," she said, her voice slightly higher than before. "My patient can become agitated if he sees strangers. Last week, he attacked a visitor and left her face badly bruised. I would not want you to get hurt." Mrs. Martha stopped, curiosity in her eyes mixing with hesitation. She looked at Lily, looked at Father Thomas, then glanced back at the door with the regret of someone denied what they sought. "Poor thing," she muttered, though her tone carried more disappointment than compassion. "Do you know who he is? Does he have family? Why bring him to the church instead of a hospital?" Father Thomas stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Mrs. Martha's shoulder, the touch of a shepherd calming his flock. "Mrs. Martha, God teaches us not to ask about the past of those who suffer. I am only following his will, and I have not forgotten my promise to pray for your Harold. This afternoon I will light candles and say special prayers for him. Will you join me?" Mrs. Martha's eyes softened at the mention of her husband's name. Curiosity gave way to longing, and she nodded slowly. "Yes, Father, please remember. Harold passed away on this very day 15 years ago." She turned to leave, slowly, but her eyes flicked back toward the room one last time before she disappeared through the church doors. Lily let out a breath, but she knew this was not over. Mrs. Martha would return. She would keep watching, keep asking questions, keep peering through windows each night. $1 million. That number was enough to turn a widow's curiosity into a call to a hotline. Lily looked out the small window as Mrs. Martha's shadow faded at the end of the alley, and she understood a brutal truth. They couldn't hide here forever. Time was racing against them, and they were losing. On the 7th day at the church, Vincent was able to stand on his own without anyone supporting him. His body was still weak, his joints still aching with every movement, but the poison had left his system, and life was slowly returning. He began light physical training in the cramped room, simple movements like push-ups, sit-ups, and walking back and forth from one wall to the other. Every drop of sweat was a step closer to the day he could face Marco, and that thought was the only fuel he needed. But during those days, between training sessions and short periods of sleep for recovery, Vincent began doing something he hadn't done in 4 years. He began to observe Lily, not the passing glance of an employer looking at a servant, not the cold stare of a mafia boss looking at a tool, but real observation, noticing small details he had once ignored as if they didn't exist. He noticed her hands were covered in scars. Faint lines ran across the backs of her hands. Longer ones traced her wrists, like remnants of a past she had spoken of but never described in detail. He noticed the way she startled at sudden sounds, even something as harmless as the church bell or the wind striking the window. That reflex wasn't normal. It belonged to someone who had lived too long in fear, someone for whom every sound could signal danger closing in. He noticed the way she ate, fast, urgent, eyes always flicking toward the door as if the food might be taken away at any moment. She never left anything on her plate, never ate slowly to savor it, only consumed it as if driven by a survival instinct carved into her bones. Vincent wondered whether, during the years she worked in his mansion, she had ever truly eaten her fill, or whether she survived on leftovers, cold bread and scraps from banquet tables he never even bothered to glance at. 4 years. She had lived in his house for 4 years, walked the same corridors, breathed the same air, and he hadn't seen her even once. She was a ghost, just as she had said, and he had been a blind man living among ghosts without ever knowing it. One evening, when Lily brought him a bowl of porridge Father Thomas had prepared, Vincent suddenly asked, "Are you afraid of me?" Lily froze, the bowl suspended in midair. She looked at him, her amber eyes no longer avoiding his as they had in the early days. "I used to be," she answered, her tone as calm as if she were speaking about the weather. "For 4 years in the mansion, I was afraid of you every day. Afraid you'd notice me. Afraid you'd lose your temper over something. Afraid I'd be thrown out and forced back onto the streets. You were the devil to me. The most frightening thing in that house." Vincent said nothing. He had heard many people speak of how terrifying he was, but no one had ever said it to his face like this. And strangely, he didn't feel anger, only a hollow ache opening in his chest. "But not anymore," Lily continued, setting the bowl down on the small table beside the bed. Vincent looked at her in surprise. Why did that change? Lily sat on the wooden chair where she had spent nights beside him during his fevered delirium, and she met his eyes directly. "Because I saw you cry in your sleep." The answer was simple and merciless. Vincent felt as if someone had struck him in the chest. "You called for your mother," Lily went on, her voice soft as drifting air. "You apologized to your father. You asked Marco why. You cried like a child lost in the dark. And I realized something." She paused, her gaze softening in a way Vincent had never seen anyone look at him. "Devils don't cry. Devils don't call their mothers. Devils don't break when betrayed by their own blood. You're not a devil, Mr. Corsetti. You're just a man who's had to be strong for so long that you forgot you were allowed to be weak." Vincent didn't know what to say. His throat tightened, and he felt something fracture inside his chest. Not anger, not pride, but the wall he had built over 20 years, the wall separating him from the rest of the world, was slowly collapsing in front of a maid whose name he hadn't even remembered a week earlier. He looked at Lily, and for the first time in many years, he wanted someone to trust him. Not because of power, not because of money, but simply because he was himself. The rainy night descended on Chicago like a curse. Water poured from the pitch-black sky, pounding against the roof of the old church like war drums. Lily stood by the window watching the curtain of rain, her unease growing heavier by the minute. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since the night she dragged Vincent out of the mansion, and every day that followed was another day lived in fear. Mrs. Martha still came and went, her eyes as sharp as ever. The radio news still mentioned the disappearance of Vincent Corsetti every single day. $1 million still hovered over their heads like a blade. Then the knock came. It was not the gentle tapping of Mrs. Martha, nor the slow knock of those seeking confession. This was 3 hard knocks, a pause, then 2 lighter ones. Lily recognized the signal at once, the same signal she had used when she brought Vincent here. She looked at Vincent, and he nodded, gray eyes alert but unafraid. Father Thomas opened the door, and a man stepped in through the rain like a ghost from the past. Tony Romano, Vincent Corsetti's head of security for 15 years. The man who had taken bullets for his boss more than once. The man Vincent had trusted as his right hand. Tony was tall and solid, salt and pepper hair soaked with rain, a hardened face carved by years spent in the shadows. But when he entered the small room and saw Vincent standing there, the tough man's face crumpled. "Boss," Tony whispered, his voice breaking. "You're alive. God help me, you're alive." Then Tony Romano, a man who had killed countless enemies with his bare hands, dropped to his knees on the church floor and cried like a child, his tears mixed with rainwater, his sobs echoing through the small room like funeral bells. "I thought you were dead," Tony said between gasps. "They said you were kidnapped. They said you might already be dead. I searched everywhere. I haven't slept a single night for 2 weeks. I thought I'd failed. I thought I'd let you die." Vincent stepped forward, pulled Tony to his feet, and did something Lily had never seen him do. He embraced his bodyguard, tightly, and for a long moment, like a man holding his own brother. "I'm still here, Tony," Vincent said, his voice low and warm. "I'm still alive. Because of her." He turned to look at Lily, and Tony followed his boss's gaze. The older guard looked at the small woman standing in the corner of the room and bowed his head with deep respect. You saved my boss's life. I owe you my life in return." Lily did not know how to respond, so she only nodded faintly and stepped back. This was their reunion, not hers. When the emotions settled, Tony began to report what had happened outside. "The news isn't good, boss," Tony said, his voice returning to the sharp edge of a warrior. "Marco has taken control of the family. He's declared himself the acting heir while claiming to search for you, and he's doing something insane." Vincent frowned. "What is it?" "He's negotiating with Nikolai Volkov." The name thickened the air in the room. Nikolai Volkov, the Russian mafia boss, the sworn enemy of the Corsetti family for 2 decades. Vincent's father had died in a war with Volkov, and now Marco was shaking hands with that man. "What kind of deal?" Vincent asked, his voice cold as ice. Tony swallowed, splitting the Corsetti empire in half. "Marco keeps the legitimate businesses and the southern territory. Volkov takes the entire underground operation and the northern territory. In return, Volkov supports Marco's claim and helps eliminate anyone who resists." Vincent was silent for a long time. Lily saw his hands clench, knuckles bleaching white, and she knew a storm was raging inside him. Marco had not only betrayed him, Marco was selling out the family their father had built with blood and tears. Marco was working with the man who had killed their father. "When?" Vincent finally asked. "When do they sign the deal?" "The annual charity gala," Tony replied. 1 week from now. The Grand Meridian Hotel. A public event, with press, politicians, and business leaders. Marco plans to sign it right under everyone's noses, believing no one will dare act in such a crowded place. 1 week. Lily saw Vincent's eyes change. The blind rage of the early days was gone. This was the gaze of a predator planning its hunt. "A charity gala," Vincent murmured. "Public, press, witnesses." He turned to Tony, a cold smile forming on his lips. "This is our chance. The only chance." Tony nodded. "I agree. If you appear in the middle of the event, in front of everyone, Marco won't be able to deny anything. He can't kill you in front of hundreds of witnesses and cameras. His kidnapping story will collapse. But we need more than an appearance," Vincent said. "We need evidence. We need internal witnesses. We need someone who can enter the gala without suspicion, observe everything, and signal us at the right moment." Both Vincent and Tony turned to look at Lily. She stood there with her back against the wall, amber eyes reading their intention before either man spoke. Her heart tightened. She had saved Vincent because she couldn't watch someone die at the hands of a person they trusted. But what they were asking now was not just about saving someone. This was entering the enemy's den, facing people who wouldn't hesitate to kill her if she were discovered. Vincent stepped in front of her, gray eyes locked onto amber ones, and he spoke in a voice Lily had never heard from him before. Not an order, not a command, but the plea of a man gambling everything on one final hand. "You saved my life, Lily. You gave me a second chance when you had no reason to do so. Now I'm asking you once more. Help me take everything back." Lily looked at him, into gray eyes that had once been cold as steel, and now held something close to begging. She thought of 4 years spent living as a ghost in a mansion. She thought of a past that had stolen her childhood. She thought of a future she had never dared to dream of, and she thought of the man in front of her. The man who cried in his sleep and called for his mother. The man who had promised to find the uncle who sold her. The man who had looked at her like a human being for the first time in her life. Lily nodded. "I'll do it," she said, her voice calm, as if she hadn't just agreed to place her life in danger. Even if this might be the last time she ever lived. 1 week of preparation passed like a whirlwind. The small room behind the church turned into a war headquarters, and everyone had their role. Vincent trained his body from early morning until late at night, pushing himself to the limit as if he were trying to compress months of strength into just a few days. In the first days, he could only manage 20 push-ups before his arms trembled and gave out. By the 5th day, that number had reached 100. The poison had left his body, and anger became an endless source of energy. Tony came every night, slipping in through the back door of the church when the darkness was thick enough to hide him. He brought everything they needed. New clothes for Vincent, a perfectly tailored black suit he would wear when he appeared in public. Detailed information about the Grand Meridian Hotel, floor plans of every level, every entrance and exit, every security camera position, a guest list filled with familiar names and others that made Vincent frown in surprise. And weapons. A compact, lightweight handgun concealed in a close-fitting leather holster, small enough to avoid detection by metal detectors that had already been disabled by Tony's people inside. But the most important part of the plan was not Vincent. It was Lily. She was taught everything she needed to survive that decisive night. Tony showed her how to enter through the service entrance behind the kitchen, where waitstaff moved in and out without anyone checking credentials. She would wear a black server uniform, blend into the staff, and move through the gala like an invisible ghost. Her role was eyes and ears. Observe Marco and Volkov. Identify the moment they signed the agreement, and send the signal to Tony when everything was ready. The signal was simple. If it was safe, she would place a glass of red wine on the left side of the tray. If it was dangerous, a glass of white wine on the right. And if she was discovered, she would break a glass. The sound of shattering glass would be the signal for Tony to act immediately, regardless of the original plan. Lily memorized everything. She repeated every detail until it was carved into her mind like instinct. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. One small mistake, and she would die. One small mistake, and Vincent would die with her. On the final night before the gala, the small room sank into a tense silence. Father Thomas had gone to bed after praying for them for a full hour. Tony had left to prepare his loyal team to lie in wait around the hotel. Only Vincent and Lily remained, sitting by the small window and looking out over the Chicago night sky. The city glittered with lights below them. Millions of lights, like millions of stars, fallen onto the earth. Lily thought about tomorrow, thought about the possibility that she might never see these lights again. And she didn't feel the fear she expected. She only felt tired. Tired of having lived in fear for too long. Vincent broke the silence, his voice low and soft like the night wind. After everything that happens tomorrow, what do you want? Lily didn't answer right away. She looked at the distant lights and considered the question. No one had asked her what she wanted in 15 years. No one had cared what she dreamed of or longed for. She had lived to survive, not to live. I want to be free, she finally said, her voice light as breath. Truly free. Not freedom on paper, not freedom because a debt has been paid, but freedom here. She placed a hand over her left chest, where her heart beat slow and steady. I want to wake up one day without fear. I want to look in the mirror and see a woman, not a ghost. I want a life, not just existence. Vincent looked at her in silence, his gray eyes softening in a way Lily had never seen before. Vincent reached out and took her small hand into his large, rough palm. I promise, he said, his gray eyes softening with a sincerity that matched the steady glow in her amber eyes. After tomorrow, you will be free, truly free. I will erase your father's debt, erase everything that binds you to the Corsetti family. You can go anywhere, do anything you want. That is my promise. Lily looked down at their intertwined hands, and she realized this was the first time in her life anyone had promised her something with such sincerity. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know whether they would survive. But in this moment, beneath the lights of Chicago and the star-filled night sky, she allowed herself to believe that promise. They sat together in silence, until the first light of dawn began to tint the horizon pink. The fateful day had arrived. The Grand Meridian Hotel rose at the heart of Chicago like a palace built for the powerful. Crystal light spilled from enormous chandeliers hanging from soaring ceilings, raining down on the sea of luxury below like artificial stars. Champagne flowed like water. Glittering evening gowns swept across the marble floors, and the laughter of the elite echoed through the grand hall like a symphony of wealth. This was the annual charity gala of the Corsetti family, an event that raised millions of dollars each year for poor children in public hospitals. The irony was cruel. The people hosting this celebration were among the ones who had soaked the city deepest in blood and sin. Lily slipped in through the service entrance behind the kitchen exactly as planned. She wore a black server uniform, her hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her face lowered to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. She had survived 4 years in the Corsetti mansion by becoming invisible, and tonight she needed that skill more than ever. No one looked at her twice. She was just one of dozens of servers moving like ghosts among the guests, carrying trays of drinks and food, bowing slightly and dissolving into the background as if they didn't exist. Lily's heart pounded like war drums as she moved through the crowd. She scanned for her target and found him immediately. Marco Corsetti stood at the center of the hall like a newly crowned king. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his hair slicked back, a charming smile on his lips as he shook hands with every important guest. He looked like a man suffering the loss of his brother, yet standing tall out of duty to the family. The performance was flawless. Beside him stood Camille Ashford, stunning in a blood-red gown, golden hair cascading over bare shoulders, Vincent's engagement ring still gleaming on her finger like a cruel mockery. She smiled at the guests, accepted condolences for her missing fiancé, and filled her sea-blue eyes with carefully crafted tears whenever someone spoke Vincent's name. Lily felt sick watching them. 2 murderers stood, bathed in light, celebrated as kind-hearted figures, while their victim hid in an old church waiting for the right moment. The world was insane. She kept moving, her eyes never leaving Marco. About an hour after the party began, she saw him break away from the crowd and head toward a side corridor leading to private meeting rooms. Another man followed him, tall with white hair and eyes as cold as ice. Nikolai Volkov. Lily recognized him from the photographs Tony had shown her. The Russian mafia boss, the sworn enemy of the Corsetti family, the man who had killed Vincent and Marco's father 20 years ago. And now Marco was shaking hands with him to sell out his own father's legacy. Lily set her tray down on a nearby table and followed them quietly. She kept a safe distance, her steps light, her breath held tight in her chest. The corridor was empty, the lights dimmer than the grand hall, the music from the gala reduced to a distant echo. Marco and Volkov stopped at the last door at the end of the hallway, exchanged a few low words Lily couldn't hear, and stepped inside. She waited, counting seconds in her mind, then crept closer. Luck was with her. The door wasn't fully closed. Through a narrow gap, she saw a private meeting room with a large oak table and leather chairs. Marco and Volkov sat across from each other, and between them lay a thick folder of documents. She watched Marco pick up a pen and sign page after page with a satisfied smile. The Corsetti empire was being sold right in front of her eyes. Lily stepped back, her heart racing out of control. She needed to return to the main hall and find a way to signal Tony. Everything was unfolding exactly as predicted. Vincent needed to know. They needed to act now. She turned and slammed into a wall. No, not a wall. A chest. Lily looked up and felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. Marco Corsetti stood inches from her, his brown eyes cold and sharp as blades. He must have left the meeting room without her noticing. There could have been another exit. He could have seen her on a security camera. He might have suspected her from the start. It didn't matter anymore. She had been caught. Lily Monroe, Marco said, his voice icy. The maid who disappeared the same night my brother vanished. What an interesting coincidence. Lily didn't have time to react. Marco's hand clamped around her wrist, squeezing until she felt bone grind against bone. He dragged her into a dark corner at the end of the corridor and slammed her against the wall with brutal force. Her back struck cold concrete, pain tearing through her spine, but she bit her lip and didn't let a sound escape. "Where is my brother?" Marco snarled, his face inches from hers, hot breath crashing against her skin. "Where are you hiding him? Do you think you can steal what belongs to me?" Lily met his gaze, amber eyes steady even as her heart threatened to burst. She said nothing. She had survived hell. She had faced monsters far worse than Marco. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing her beg. "Silent," Marco hissed, the smile vanishing from his face, replaced by madness. "Fine." He pulled a handgun from inside his jacket and aimed it straight at Lily's forehead. The barrel pressed against her skin, freezing and deadly. "I'll count to 3, Marco said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "If you don't tell me where Vincent is, I'll pull the trigger right here. No one will hear the shot over that music." 1. Lily closed her eyes. 2. She thought of Vincent, of the promise of freedom, of gray eyes that had looked at her like she was human. She didn't regret it. Even if she died here, she didn't regret it. Marco counted to 2, and Lily felt his finger tighten around the trigger. Marco opened his mouth to speak the final number, but the sound never left his throat because another voice cut through the darkness, cold and sharp as a blade. "Put her down." Lily opened her eyes. Marco froze, the gun still pressed to her forehead but his finger no longer moving. He turned toward the end of the corridor, and for the first time in her life Lily saw real fear on the face of a killer. Vincent Corsetti stepped out of the shadows like a ghost returned from hell. He was no longer the pale and weakened man Lily had dragged from the mansion 2 weeks earlier. He was no longer the trembling patient burning with fever she had stayed awake to care for. The man standing at the end of the corridor was Vincent Corsetti, head of the Corsetti family, the silent viper, the man all of Chicago feared. The black suit clung to his solid frame, his dark hair slicked back to perfection, and his steel-gray eyes burned with controlled fury. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, calm and lethal, and his silence was more terrifying than any roar. "You," Marco whispered, his voice shaking, his face drained white as if he were staring at a dead man's spirit. "You're alive. That's impossible. You should be dead. The poison was enough to kill a horse." "You can't still be alive." Vincent didn't answer. He walked forward, each step echoing through the empty corridor like a death drum. Marco stood frozen, trapped between shooting Lily or turning the gun on Vincent, and that hesitation was his fatal mistake. because Vincent didn't give him time to choose. One moment Vincent stood 3 steps away. The next, his fist crashed into his brother's jaw with the force of 20 years of betrayed trust. The crack of bone echoed down the corridor, dry and unmistakable like snapping wood. Marco collapsed to the floor, the gun flying from his hand and skidding across the marble. Blood spilled from the corner of his mouth, staining the pristine white shirt beneath his expensive suit. Still, he reached for the gun, survival instinct stronger than pain, his fingers trembling as they brushed the grip. Vincent stepped forward and brought his heel down on Marco's hand, hard and merciless. Bones shattered beneath the polished leather shoe, and this time Marco screamed, the sound ripping through the corridor. "You chose the wrong person to betray," Vincent said, his voice ice-cold, calm as if discussing the weather rather than standing on his brother's crushed hand. "And you chose the wrong person to threaten." He turned to Lily, and for a brief moment the steel in his gray eyes softened when he looked at her. "Are you hurt?" Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She was still shaking, not from Marco, but because she had just witnessed a devil return from the dead, and that devil had saved her. Marco's scream shattered the barrier of sound between the corridor and the grand hall. The music stopped. Whispers spread like ripples in water, then footsteps, dozens of them, flooding toward the corridor like a tide. The crowd appeared at the far end, faces mixing curiosity and panic. Phones rose, screens blazing in the darkness. Someone shouted that it was Vincent Corsetti, and real chaos erupted. From behind the crowd, Tony Romano emerged with 6 men in black suits, Vincent's last loyal unit. They moved fast and precise like a wound machine. 2 seized Nikolai Volkov the moment he tried to slip from the meeting room, slamming him to the floor and cuffing him before he could react. 2 others secured the thick folder from the table, proof of Marco's treason. The rest formed a protective wall around Vincent and Lily. Marco lay on the floor, his right hand destroyed, blood spilling from his mouth, yet he laughed, a warped and manic sound twisted by pain and defiance. "You think you've won," he choked between laughs. "You think catching me is enough. You understand nothing, Vincent. You never did." Vincent didn't reply. He simply looked down at his brother with eyes no longer filled with anger, only a deep sorrow like the ocean. Camera flashes began to explode. Reporters were already there, swift as vultures scenting blood. They shoved through the crowd, cameras raised, microphones thrust forward like spears. Questions rained down without pause. "Mr. Corsetti, what happened? Who kidnapped you? Why are you here? Who is the man on the floor?" Vincent didn't answer them. He turned to Lily, gently took her hand, and led her out of the shadows. Flashes burst like lightning, illuminating 2 people who had just walked out of hell. And in that moment, amid chaos and blinding light, Lily saw Camille forcing her way through the crowd, her face drained pale with panic. Camille shoved through the crowd like a panicked animal searching for an escape. But she didn't run. She rushed straight toward Vincent, her beautiful face twisted into an expression Lily couldn't quite name, somewhere between terror and desperation. "Vincent," she screamed, her voice shrill and shaking, her hands reaching for him as if to cling to his body. "My love, you're alive. I was so worried. I thought I'd lost you. This is all a misunderstanding. Everything is just a misunderstanding. I can explain. I love you. I'd never hurt you." The performance was flawless. Tears streamed down her powdered cheeks, ocean blue eyes overflowing with pain and devotion, her voice breaking as if her heart were shattering. If Lily hadn't seen Camille smiling with Marco in the dark, hadn't heard her calmly discussing increasing the poison dosage, she might have believed her. The whole world probably would have believed her, but Vincent didn't. He stood still, unmoving, letting Camille rush up to him, letting her hand brush his shoulder. Then he spoke, his voice so cold the air around them seemed to freeze. "I heard you say you doubled the dose in my whiskey." Camille froze. Her hand stopped midair, fingers trembling like leaves in a storm. The smile shattered on her lips, and for the first time Lily saw her true face. The seductive beauty was gone. The false tenderness vanished. All that remained was the raw fear of a predator realizing she'd become prey. "Vincent," Camille stammered, "you misunderstood. I don't know what you're talking about. I love you. I'd never." The hotel's main doors burst open and an FBI team flooded in like a tidal wave. They wore black tactical gear, weapons drawn, moving swiftly and precisely through the panicked crowd. Leading them was a middle-aged woman with short cropped hair and eyes sharp as knives, striding straight toward Vincent, as if she'd known exactly where he'd be. "Mr. Corsetti," she said, her voice professional and cold. "I'm Special Agent Morrison. We received information from your people. We're here to arrest those who plotted to murder you." Vincent nodded toward Marco lying on the floor, and Camille standing frozen before him. "Them. And one more. Rosa Martinez, the head housekeeper. She personally mixed the poison into my drink." As if on cue, Tony stepped forward with a trembling woman beside him. Rosa Martinez, 52 years old, who had managed the Corsetti household staff for 10 years. She looked as if she'd aged 20 years overnight, her face ashen, eyes swollen from crying, her entire body shaking as though she might collapse. "I didn't know," she sobbed the moment she faced Vincent, tears streaming down her lined face. "I swear I didn't know it was poison. Miss Ashford said it was just a sedative, something to help you sleep better. She paid me a lot of money, and I needed it for my grandson's treatment. I never meant to kill you. I swear to God I didn't know." "You traitorous bitch!" Camille screamed, her face contorted with rage, every trace of beauty and grace evaporating as if it had never existed. "You dare blame me, you filthy trash. You took my money and now you turn on me." That outburst was all the FBI needed. Agent Morrison signaled, and 2 agents stepped in, cuffing Camille before she could say another word. "Camille Ashford, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "No," Camille screamed, thrashing like a fish in a net. "You can't do this. I'm Senator Ashford's daughter. You'll regret this." Her voice cut off as the cuffs snapped shut around her wrists, metal clicking cold and final. She was dragged away, still screaming and cursing, but no one listened anymore. On the floor, Marco still lay there, his right hand crushed. The bleeding slowed, but the wound still raw and horrifying. But he didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just lay there and laughed, a mad sound echoing through the corridor like a crow's call over a graveyard. "You want to know why, don't you?" Marco said, his brown eyes fixed on Vincent with something that wasn't hatred but almost relief. The relief of finally speaking the truth. "You want to know why I did this?" Vincent didn't answer. He simply stood there, looking down at his brother with unreadable eyes. "Because I hated you," Marco continued, his voice no longer manic, only endlessly tired. "I hated you since I was a child. I hated how Father always compared me to you. Why can't you be like Vincent? Why aren't you as strong as Vincent? Why can't you be Vincent? I grew up in your shadow, and that shadow swallowed everything I ever did." He paused, swallowing blood in his throat. "Do you know what it's like to spend your whole life as someone else's failed copy? Do you know what it's like when people look at you and only see Vincent Corsetti's brother? I didn't have a name. I didn't have an identity. I was just a shadow, and I wanted out of that shadow. By killing you." Vincent finally moved. He knelt down slowly until his face was level with Marco's on the floor. Gray eyes met brown, and in that moment they were no longer a mafia boss and a traitor. They were just 2 brothers who had lost each other long before this tragedy. "If you wanted the throne," Vincent said, his voice low and aching, "I would have stepped aside. If you'd come to me and said you wanted to lead the family, I would have given you everything. Because you're my brother. Because I loved you. But you didn't. You chose the most cowardly path. You chose to poison me. You chose to ally with the man who killed our father. You betrayed not only me, but his memory." Marco fell silent. For the first time since he'd begun speaking, there were no words left. The mad laughter faded. The defiance vanished. All that remained was a man lying on a cold floor, staring up at his brother with suddenly empty eyes. And in those brown eyes, Lily saw something flicker. Not hatred, not anger, but regret. Regret that came far too late to change anything. When the FBI led Marco and Camille away, the reporters swarmed like a hive kicked open. They surrounded Vincent, cameras pointed straight at his face, microphones thrust forward like spears hungry for answers. Questions crashed down like a storm. "Mr. Corsetti, who kidnapped you? Where were you hiding for the past 2 weeks? Was your brother behind all of this? Do you have any comment on your fiancé's arrest?" Vincent stood tall, calm in the eye of the media hurricane, and for the first time in his life, he told the truth to the world. "I wasn't kidnapped," he said, his voice carrying through the grand hall that had fallen silent to listen. "I was poisoned by my own brother and my fiancé. They put poison in my drinks every night, slowly killing me while smiling at me every morning. I almost died in my own home, at the hands of the people I trusted most." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, but Vincent didn't stop. He turned his head, searching the crowd, and his gaze found Lily. She stood slightly back, as she always did, trying to make herself invisible among the sea of people, shoulders drawn in as if she could melt into the wall. 4 years of living like a ghost had taught her that attention never brought anything good. But Vincent didn't let her disappear this time. He stepped toward her. The crowd instinctively parted, making way, and he stopped in front of Lily. Gray eyes met amber eyes, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning as the predator and the survivor found peace in each other. Then he took her hand, gently but firmly, leading her from the shadows of a ghost into the light of a partner. "This woman," Vincent said, his voice echoing through the silence, "is Lily Monroe. She was a housekeeper in my home. She has no money. She has no power. She had no reason to save me. But when she heard them plotting to kill me, she risked her life to pull me out. She cared for me when I was dying of fever. She turned down a $1 million reward that anyone else could have claimed with a single phone call. She has something money can't buy. True loyalty. Pure courage." Lily stood there, under hundreds of eyes and dozens of camera lenses, and felt tears stream down her cheeks. Not from sadness, not from fear, but because, for the first time in her 24 years of life, she was seen, acknowledged, treated as someone who mattered. She wasn't a ghost anymore. After the media storm faded, after the FBI finished collecting evidence, after the crowd dispersed and the hotel returned to silence, Vincent and Lily stood on the top-floor balcony, looking out over Chicago at night. The city glittered below like a carpet woven from millions of stars. The night wind brushed against them, carrying the chill of autumn and the scent of approaching rain. "After everything that's happened," Vincent said softly, in a tone Lily had never heard from him before, "what do you want? Anything. Money, a home, a new life, anywhere you want. I'll give you everything." Lily was quiet for a long moment, staring at the distant lights. Then she turned to him and asked instead, "What do you want?" Vincent looked at her, gray eyes no longer cold as steel, but lit with something fragile and sincere. "I want you to stay," he said quietly. "Not as a housekeeper. As my partner. You're the only one who saw me at my weakest and didn't run. You're the only one who saved me when you had no reason to. I don't want to lose you." Lily didn't answer with words. She simply smiled, her first real smile in many years, and nodded. They didn't leave the hotel in one of the supercars lined up outside. Vincent took Lily's hand, walked past the gleaming Ferraris and Porsches, and hailed a regular taxi waiting on the corner. An old cab with cracked leather seats and the faint smell of cheap cologne, completely opposite to the world of luxury Vincent had lived in for 20 years. But when they sat in the back seat, when the door closed and the car began to move, Vincent turned to Lily and said, "This is the first time I felt safe." Lily looked at him, amber eyes glowing in the passing streetlights. "This is the first time I'm not invisible," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. And that old taxi carried them into the night, leaving behind a fallen empire and moving toward an unwritten future. They say the Mafia has no heart, but that night, a Mafia boss learned that power can't protect anyone from betrayal, and that salvation can come from the most unexpected place. Lily Monroe entered Vincent Corsetti's life like a shadow, and left it as the only light in his darkness. This story reminds us that sometimes, the people who truly love us aren't the ones who speak the sweetest words, but the ones who stay when we've lost everything. Sometimes, true loyalty comes from where we least expect it, from people we never noticed. And sometimes, saving someone else is the only way to save ourselves. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share, so we can keep bringing you meaningful stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever had someone in your life like Lily? Someone who quietly stood by you until the moment you truly needed them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear the stories that come from the deepest parts of your heart. Wishing everyone watching good health, peace, and joy every day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.